Hello everyone, this is Aishwarya and today's topic is Reform Bill. Let's start with the introduction. That is, Reform Bill is consequent on agrarian and industrial revolution. Victorian England was plagued by many problems. Many reform acts were passed to tackle these matters, and these reforms were of five types. First one, parliamentary reforms, social reforms, economic reforms, educational reforms, and religious reforms. And first reform is parliamentary reforms. And causes for parliamentary reform is the representation to parliament was not fair and equitable. Many boroughs and countries were underpopulated because many of the inhabitants had gone to town in search of better jobs. But despite the fall in population, these boroughs and countries were allowed by existing rules to send two representatives each to parliament. At the same time, new industrial towns were not allowed to elect any representative. Another injustice was in earlier ages, a freeholder with an annual income of 40 shillings was considered rich and allowed to vote at parliamentary elections. The big tenant farmers in Victorian age were rich, but the old rules did not allow them to vote. The third injustice was the corn law, favored the agriculturist by raising the price of corn. Poor people were adversely affected, but they had no representation in parliament to ventilate their grievances. And the next is the Reform Bill of 1832. To make a parliament truly representative, a reform bill was passed on 7 June 1832. According to this act, 56 thinly populated rotten boroughs were deprived of representation in parliament. 65 seats were given to new boroughs. Scottish and Irish countries were also given seats in parliament. As a result of this act, the Lord lost their power, the middle classes became more powerful, the property qualification of voters was lower, 2,20,000 residents of towns got the voting right. They were supporters of Whig Party, the Whig Party outshone of Tory Party. After the first Reform Bill, the second Reform Bill was started in 1867. The first Reform Bill was greeted enthusiastically in the beginning, but it did not meet all the demands of poor people. So the people was opposed by the Chartists to meet their demands. The second Reform Bill was introduced by Gladstone but was opposed by Liberals. Benjamin Disraeli introduced the Bill Parliament in 1867 and it was passed. The second bill lowered the qualification of county voters, so the number of county voters increased from 5,40,000 to 7,90,000. All male householders paying an annual rent of £10 in towns got the voting right, but the agriculture, labourers and miners were denied their voting right. The Third Reform Act in 1884. The Act abolished small rotten boroughs. Country householders were given the voting right. And the Fourth Reform Act in 1918. The Fourth Reform Act of 1918 gave the voting right to all 21-year-old men and women aged 25 and above. The Fifth Reform Act of 1928. This act abolished the age difference between men and women voters. All who were 21, whether male or female, got the voting right. Thus, the Reform Acts made Parliament more representative than it was in past, echoing the voice of the people in general. The government of England became democratic. The Social Reform Acts. Factories were filthy in extreme. The labourers' condition was most wretched. It was like living in hell. The owners of factories concentrated only on maximizing their profits. They did not pay any attention to the lot of workers. Sir Robert Peel passed many factory acts for the betterment of workers. Let's see what the factory acts were passed. The first one, Factory Act of 1802, fixed the working hours of labourers at 12. Second, the Factory Act of 1809 banned the employment of children under 9. This act made a significant breakthrough in many ways. Boys between 13 and 18 were not to work for more than 12 hours a day. Children and young people were not to work in night shifts. Education of children at the cost of the factory was mandatory. The inspectors were appointed to enforce the acts were followed. The ministries of Campbell, Bannerman and carried out a lots of social reforms. Picketing was legalized. Medical aid was given to workers who got injured in accidents. Compensation was given to victims of accidents. The next is the Poor Laws. It was Queen Elizabeth who first thought of need for aiding the poor and unemployed. The Poor Law was passed by her taxed the wealthy to set up a relief center for feeding, clothing and housing the poor and unemployed. All later Poor Laws were modification of the Elizabethan law. The Speenham Land Act passed in 1795 saw to it that those who were employed but paid very low wages were also given relief from the relief fund. This act had two harmful side effects. First, the employer deliberately paid very low wages because the low wages were sure to be supplemented by government. Second, many of the laborers were really worse off than those who were taken care of in the relief center. And next, economic reforms. Peel was believer in the philosophy of free trade or laissez-faire, and initiated by Adam Smith in his book The Wealth of Nations. Peel wanted to give a free hand to manufacturers. He permitted them to import raw material, paying a duty of 5%. He introduced the income tax which the people paid willingly. He passed the Bank Charter Act of 1844. Under his guidance, the Bank of England issued currency notes on basis of government stock. He boldly repealed the Corn Law despite party criticism in order to help the poor. And next, educational reforms. Only in 19th century efforts were taken to systematize education in England. In 19th century, education was imparted by church along with the aid given by philanthropists. The Act of 1833 also passed. The Elementary Education Act of 1870 passed. Higher Education of 1871 also passed in these educational reforms. And last one is church reforms. The Methodist movement, Evangelical movement and the Oxford movement had noticeable effects on the religious faith of the English people. The evolutionary theories of Charles Darwin dealt with severe blow to the believers in biblical version that man was created at a stroke by God. Many church reforms were carried out by Peel. He passed many acts between 1836 and 1840. There was no longer any religious intolerance between the Protestant Church of England and Catholic Church. Different brands of religious arose without the government interfering in their functioning. In conclusion, the proposed reform bills offer a promising path towards addressing critical issues and improving our current systems with a focus on people, health, and wealth. These bills present a tangible opportunity for positive change. Successful implementation will require collaborative efforts, public engagement, and ongoing evaluation to ensure that the reform translates into meaningful improvements of our society. And, and I have given assessment here. Answer it in comments below. Okay. Thank you for watching. Bye.